a history of the development of the modern day anti-slavery movement, but I wanted to focus on the anti-pornography work because that is such a key part of the work that we're doing. And so, you know, you could go way, way back. We've started to say that sexual exploitation is the oldest oppression, and so it does go way back. I can't go all the way back. I'm in the process right now of writing a book. It's a documentary guide to the development of the movement, and it goes back to the 1600s and the anti-slavery movement there, and then works its way up through white slavery and up to the 90s and modern day slavery, and I hope that will be out in 2017. And it uses primary source material, so it's really been a wonderful project to see sort of the continuum. So I can't go that far back today, but I did want to go back to kind of the decade I was born. So because that's when I think it all started. And let me see, I can do this, right? I have to point it? Okay, good. Yeah. So we know this is a problem. We know it's a problem in the U.S. We know it's a global problem. And as much work as we're doing here, I think we are going to have a lot of work all around the world to do because we've been exporting this now for a good 70 years. I just wanted to start a little bit with the terms and definitions. Lisa had one. Is it in the but I think it's important because one thing that CESE has added to the mix that is critical is the sexual exploitation, not commercial sexual exploitation, so that the continuum includes not just the buying and selling, prostitution, pimping, pandering, procuring, maintaining a brothel. These are all the sort of commercial sexual exploitation terms around prostitution or the related activities. Pornography, stripping, exotic dancing, or pole dancing, lap dancing, sexual massage, escort agencies, phone sex lines, internet sex chat rooms, sex trafficking, forced and early childhood marriage, mail order brides, sex tourism. I probably forgot a few, Lisa, but these are all commercial sexual exploitation. And then Lisa has them categorized under child sexual abuse, but non-commercial, and I think this is so important because for so long, again, this is another kind of titanium, they call it in the military, titanium stovepipes, you know, that we can't break through. We're working on one or the other, is the child sexual abuse that takes place. There may not be an exchange of money. Incest, molestation, all kinds of things that are happening in the home, in the neighborhoods. And when I've been doing my surveys of survivors, the precursor, really the adverse childhood event that sort of was the beginning of that damaged feeling that Dawn was talking about, often took place in a non-commercial setting that then set them up for the exploitation in the commercial setting. And so I think that continuum and adding that is just so critical and so important, and I thank you for that. So I want to start in the 50s. I was born in 1951, so this shows you how far back this goes. And 2 years later, at his kitchen table in a Chicago apartment, an Esquire editor decided to break away and do his own thing, Hugh Hefner, and he put together the first issue of Playboy in his kitchen. And his big idea was that he would have, he featured in it, excuse me, a nude photo of a starlet. He found a starlet, Marilyn Monroe, who was trying to make her way up the ladder in Hollywood. And he put her in as a centerfold. And the first edition sold out in 2 weeks. It was 50 cents, 50,000 circulation, and he knew he was onto something. This is, to me, that the point where we moved from sort of the back room, it's secret sort of, I know it's not right to do this, to the beginning of the normalizing the mainstream objectification of women. This to me is a key place, because month after month after month then Playboy was putting out for the rest of the 1950s and early 60s these magazines that men were buying, and this is, I believe, where we began the culture of exploitation that we're now facing right now. So if you think of 70 years of the building of this, and I'm going to take you through this really quickly because I'm supposed to do this in 20 minutes, and I do want to have time for question and answer. I really would love to have a little bit of time because all of you are experts out there. So, but this was the beginning of it, in my opinion. And by the 1960s, Playboy had competition. Penthouse was founded in 1965 in the UK, moved to the US. 1969 was the first issue. Bob Guccione's, his big idea was full frontal nudity. So Playboy had been sort of oblique usually, but his was full frontal nudity, and again you see the first edition circulation over 100,000, 75 cents. And by the 70s, when I was in college, Larry Flynt had published his first issue of Hustler magazine, and there the hardcore themes had started to emerge. So you can see from Playboy, which was sort of gentle, and then the Penthouse with the full frontal nudity and a little bit more, rougher themes. And then by the time I was in college, this was out on the stands every month. And at first with the covers on it, and then not even that. I mean, they were just everywhere and every place, and they had moved into the mainstream. All three of those magazines you could get at 7-Eleven. You could get them almost anywhere, and they were, in view for children, and as mothers were taking their kids through a grocery line, you could see them. And so we were again moving, and here's the cover that sort of catalyzed the first of the women's movement against pornography. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm not going to do as much on morality in media because I wasn't a part of that at that time, but I was a part of this movement and this meat grinder issue where there had been some feedback from women's groups that, hey, you're treating us like a piece of meat, and so they just took it to the literally, and put this woman through the meat grinder. And they also had a feature in Hustler every month. Chester the molester would molest a different child. And so it's hard to imagine this now for those of you who are younger, but again, this was everywhere. And so all of us we were beginning to realize that this was a critical part of why we were seeing so much of the rape culture. So I was in San Francisco right after I graduated from college, and we also had the burgeoning phenomenon of movie theaters and hardcore movie theaters, and then mainstreaming of hardcore porn movie theaters. And two of the leaders in this were the Mitchell brothers. They came to a really sad end many years later, but they built a literal empire of adult pornography films and movies, and glamorized and legitimized pornography and hardcore pornography. And this is their the front of their movie theater in San Francisco, which was, again, out in the middle of a very nice district of San Francisco, near the Van Ness area, if you know SF. And so for years, they were a part of not just the pornography culture, but they were inviting police officers and police chiefs and judges and city council people, and so pornography had become a way of life, and San Francisco is emblematic of what was going on in many other big cities in the United States. And it was almost impossible to fight it. It was just 24/7 surround sound. And so in a way, as I was listening the last day, as we talked about how it's with us, on our phones, and that our kids are getting it, well, it was with us in that same way. We didn't have smartphones, we didn't have the kind of technology that we have, but it was everywhere. And here's the red light district in San Francisco in the late 70s. Let's see, and this was, Carol Dodo was the first topless, and she was, again, everywhere. She went to all the right parties, saw all the right people, and so was just a part of the, sort of mainstream. They marketed her so that people came down to see her, but she also was out and about in society. And she got lots of interviews in newspapers. And now I'm just going to go through really quickly so you can see. And it wasn't just in one red light district. It began to spread to 4 or 5 other areas of the city where people were making such big money off this that it was really becoming sort of a way to make it big. And so, let's see, I'm trying to, there. The other thing that happened was magazines and newspapers began to produce these once-a-week editions of pornography magazines, and they were available for 25 cents on the corners of I would say there were hundreds, maybe thousands of them in the corners of the big cross streets in San Francisco. And you'd have the San Francisco Chronicle and one other paper, the Bay Area paper, and the Bay Guardian, and then all the rest of them were these porn rags, these porn sheets, which you could get, and they were visible again at eye level for children. And we also had in our newspapers, in the San Francisco Chronicle, in the sports section, 4 or 5 pages, full pages of ads for all these places that you could go to, and magazines that you could buy, and the theaters, so that men were being confronted with this constantly in every single day in the ads. So there was what had grown up, because it was such a moneymaker, and because I think there's a cycle really that as men saw it and it was available, they would buy it, and that would, that spiral of success made it so that it became more and more a part of the culture. And then we had, I think it was 68 or 62, Morality in Media was founded and had begun to do some work speaking out against pornography. And you had chapters, I think, in many cities across the U.S., and did the kinds of, demonstrations and protests in various cities to help raise awareness of the problem, the growing problem. But around 1968, we had this commission that Pat talked about, the Commission on Obscenity and Pornography, and while it was supposed to be something that would help us to understand the harm of pornography, it turned out to be a setback, because they commissioned one study from a Danish social scientist who found that in Denmark, the rise of pornography had not resulted in a rape culture. This was his finding, at least. And that one study was the sort of centerpiece of this obscenity, the Commission's report, which came out in 1970, and basically said, yes, we should keep it from children, but adults should be free to watch anything they want to watch, or to view or buy anything that they want to buy. And so groups began to form to object to that, and some of the feminists were also beginning to come together as a result of this. So in my first beginning to work against this was in the first Violence Against Women conference in 1976 in San Francisco. This is the Women's Building in San Francisco. And there they had, Susan Brown Miller had just published in 1975 Against Our Will, which is the kind of classic book that talks about the rise of the rape culture and what rape culture is all about, and how rape culture is a conscious movement by men to intimidate and keep women subordinated. And out of that book and several other books came this first Violence Against Women conference. There had been lots of consciousness-raising groups and work on women's rights and sexual harassment, but this focused on rape, on domestic violence, on sexual harassment, and then there was one tiny little workshop on media violence in one of the rooms, and I went to that. And in that room, somebody from San Francisco State University had put together a kind of a visual, which was, I think for those of us, there were about 40 of us in that workshop, that was the eye opener. And that visual was four walls, which started with the really hardcore pornography that we were seeing down in the North Beach district, and all those themes that Dawn has talked about, the incest and the bondage and the animal pornography and all of that kind of thing that was just out there. And so there was one whole wall that was covered with that. One whole wall that was covered with the kind of acceptable pornography, softcore. There was hardcore and softcore. There was a line between them. And one whole wall was covered with Playboy and perhaps some Penthouse. And then one wall was I think I have it here a little bit, yeah. And then the third wall was porn images in high fashion, because by that time, a lot of pornography had begun to bleed into Vogue and some of the runway models, and you saw a model with her who was lying on the ground, and then a guy's heel was in her mouth, that kind of thing. And then she was in Yves Saint Laurent, and then the fourth wall was pornography images that had seeped into mainstream media, even as much as Good Housekeeping and Red Book and those kinds of things. And when we walked into that room and we began to look at and see that sort of continuum, that was when this group, WAVEPAM, the Women Against Violence in Pornography and Media, and I will tell you, the IN is so interesting because we argued for at least 6 months about whether it should be Women Against Violence in Pornography and Media or Women Against Violence and Pornography in Media. And I was for the latter. It may sound like it doesn't make a difference, but it does. I mean, are we against pornography, or are we just against the violence in pornography? But we saw this continuum, and we decided we needed to do something. And we would start in our own city, and there were about 40 of us, and we decided we would continue to meet. And we had a few actions. I had forgotten, Lisa, the action on the educational tours, but I do remember that we did one kind of guerrilla thing one night where we had printed up about 300 of these pieces of paper that said, women should be free from pornography. We have the right to freedom from pornography. And we pasted wallpaper paste, and we went to every one of those corner newspaper dispensing machines. And I remember, I was such a good girl. I had never, ever broken a law. But we did that in one night. And the next night it got mentioned in San Francisco Chronicle and in Herb Cain, which was the place to be mentioned. And that was our launch of our movement. This was, I think this was beginning to happen in several cities where women were beginning to say, no, we don't like this. We're worth more than this. And in that way, the fledgling sort of understanding and coming together of morality in media and some of the religious groups and the women's movement, that was the sort of the fledgling understanding that every person has dignity and sacredness and worth, and that this is intrinsic and inherent. And whether you felt it was God-given or it was a human right, that we all agreed that that was something that we knew we wanted to work to make happen, and we wanted to work against this culture. So at the same time, also, some of you may have heard of snuff films. These were actually being shown in San Francisco, in Los Angeles, in New York, and while Wikipedia will tell you, oh, they proved that never really happened, I don't think there really is proof about what happened and what didn't happen. But these things were so realistic, and so one of the things we did was go as a group and view this snuff film and then protest the snuff films, and we were able in Los Angeles and in San Francisco to close the snuff films down in 2 weeks after they opened up. So that was another first action, kind of like the momentum that you're talking about, Dawn. We began to feel like we could make some progress, and we were getting coverage in the newspapers, and people were beginning to agree with us that this was terrible and we needed to do something about it. This was the snuff film protest in Los Angeles that, again, catalyzed down there the first anti-pornography organizing of another group that was a sister group to the Women Against Violence and Pornography in Media. And here was the biggest action that we took. So for a year after those first few actions, we worked on a bringing together of all of the different groups that were working on violence against women to say pornography is kind of the basis or the foundation. Robin Morgan said pornography is the theory, rape is the practice. I think pornography is the theory, exploitation of all sorts is the practice. And so we decided we needed to bring everyone together, and we would have a conference in San Francisco, and we were able to get all the leading feminists to agree to speak. Lisa mentioned some of them yesterday. Andrea Dworkin, the late Andrea Dworkin, gave the keynote speech at the end, and at the end of it, we had a candlelight march. So we had about 400 or 500 people attend the conference, and then there were at least 6,000. It's somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000, depending upon who does the counting, that took to the streets, and we shut down the North Beach area for a full 24 hours. These are just a couple of pictures of it. And it birthed the anti-pornography women's movement. And out of that came the book Take Back the Night, in which we published all the speeches. But I thought also what was so successful about this was that we were able to bring together the child abuse groups, the domestic violence, the anti-DV groups, the sexual assault and rape crisis centers, all that continuum had come together, and that's how we got these thousands and thousands and thousands of people, because we did realize that all of these forms were connected, and so we were there, where we're starting to get back to now here. what happened? Where was the gap? Gail Dines and I were talking yesterday about what happened to all those feminists, and you know, they seemed to be so active in the 70s, and then what happened in the 80s? Well, I think a couple of things happened. One, I do think that once the pornographers and the industry realized that we were going to get attention, that we were a third voice, because everyone had heard the morality and media voice, and they had already begun to categorize that movement as, you know, oh, those religious people, oh, those prudes, oh, those. And so when feminists came out and said, but wait a second, we agree completely with them, that was very difficult for the pornographers to suppress. And they began to attack. I think they began to attack all of us in different ways. And Dawn and I were just talking recently about the kind of the isolation and the ways that worked. I know that when I was the one sort of organizing and putting out a newsletter every month and holding the weekly meetings, and I was getting death threats. I was getting calls from men who would pretend like they had called a brothel and were ordering services. I was getting. They knew my home address, and I was getting things plastered on my walls. I was getting eggs thrown on my porch. So pretty soon, I think there were a lot of people who were saying, is this worth it? Is it really worth it? And by isolating and separating us out, and a couple of my colleagues said, well, I'm only going to work on child pornography. I'm not going to work on the rest of that pornography. And others sort of drifted away. And at the same time, I had noticed that the research that we quoted in Take Back the Night, there's a section that there was early research by men and women that had been funded by the U.S. government. The funds for that began to dry up because that research was proving that pornography is harmful and that it does have a personal and a societal effect. And so those funds began to dry up, and I heard, honestly, I heard stories of, there was one very promising researcher, young man in Canada, in one of the major universities there, and he had a sexual harassment suit. He had somebody in his class who sort of, worked her way into his sort of personal life, and then slapped him with a sexual harassment suit. And so I think all kinds of dirty tricks were also happening at that time, and soon we saw a drop off. We really did. The other thing that happened, so these are just a couple more, and I forgot to say that the next year after, up here, the next year after our conference, the women in New York organized and had a similar conference, and so we had the Women Against Violence and Pornography in Media, we had Women Against Pornography, and we were beginning to go strong. And then the 80s hit. And I didn't get to complete this slide, and I think I was giving Pat heart failure because he had to go through and black out all of the, I was trying to show you what we were confronted with, but in any event, that was the beginning of the computer age and the videos. And I don't know how many of you remember Blockbuster and other places where you would go in and there would be a curtain. There was the family stuff, and then there was a curtain behind which was all the really bad stuff that you could buy if you were go and rent if you were an adult. So we had this moving from the streets to the home, and that was a new phenomenon, and I think we weren't ready for that. And so all of the kind of the blatant in your face in the newspapers, in the magazine racks, in the on the streets, in the all the districts that we all shopped in, that started to recede, and this took its place. And so the 80s, there was a lull there, and it wasn't until the 90s that that we began to see an emergence of some new groups that were beginning to approach this from a little bit different angle. ECPACT, Dawn mentioned, it's now called End Child Prostitution and Trafficking, but it started as End Child Pornography. Because of the child pornography that was being produced in Southeast Asia and other places, and they held their first conference on the World Congress against commercial sexual exploitation of children. There was a focus on both the prostitution of children, but also a very big focus on child pornography. And the Protection Project, which I founded, which moved to Harvard, the very first work that we did was gathering all the laws on pornography and child pornography, on the tripartite laws of production, distribution, and possession of child pornography. So the work was going on. It had just morphed a little bit. And then we had the first survivors begin to emerge, tell their stories of what had happened to them when they were, children or young adults, and how they had been bought and sold. We had SAGE, Norma Hotelling at SAGE. We had Breaking Free. We had a couple of others that emerged in the early 90s. And a new movement began to grow up that didn't quite coalesce and bring all these issues together, but it at least was still working on the exploitation of women and children. The Protection Project moved into collecting all the laws worldwide that addressed all the forms of exploitation. So all the laws on prostitution, pimping, pandering, procuring, maintaining a brothel, and then also laws on involuntary servitude and slavery, because those laws were sometimes the only laws that countries had to utilize against this kind of buying and selling. And at the same time, we began to realize that this was not just happening in the US, it was happening all over the world. And in fact, there were a couple of really egregious cases. The one that made the New York Times front page was a case of a wildlife trafficking organization called Global Survival Network. And they were before IJM, International Justice Mission, existed, they had TITAC cameras, and they were going in and trying to track people who were selling Siberian tigers and all of that kind of wildlife trafficking. And big in the Siberian tiger sales and other kinds of exotic wildlife was the Russian mafia. And they had arranged a buy of a Siberian tiger and were going to film it secretively. And when they got there, their connection said, "We don't have a tiger, but we've got this room full of women, and you can buy them." And they went into the back room, and the TITAC camera was on, and you can see this in a film called Bought and Sold. So it came out in 1998. And the filming was done in 1996 and 97. And they proceeded to negotiate for this room full of women from Ukraine, from Russia, from newly independent states, who were being trafficked to Europe and to the US. And that case, when that very gritty film hit the stands, it catalyzed the U.S. Congress and some of the groups that had been working quietly to begin to look at what were the laws like, what are we doing, is what we have adequate for what we're combating. And we realized, no, but we have slavery laws that are over 100 years old. We have involuntary servitude laws. We have all these prostitution, pimping, pandering laws, most of which had a hand slap, 3 months or 6 months at the most. And we needed to regroup and rethink what we would do. And that was the beginning of the negotiation in Congress and the beginning of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. And it brought together, for the first time, the feminist groups and the religious and conservative groups, all under this umbrella of this is wrong, this is, this is hurting us, and this kind of exploitation can't continue. And so that brings you up to the year 2000. And, oops. Yeah. That's one of the images from the movie. And I will stop here. I'm out of time. I hope I have time for a few questions. You all know that the Trafficking Victims Protection Act had a new definition of trafficking, which included the whole pipeline of activity. So instead of just the one, person that bought or sold, it was the recruiting, transporting, harboring, buying, and selling of a person. And so that was incredible because it had reach all the way to the recruiters in one country or another country to whatever country they were trafficking in. It created new sets of statutes in our criminal code, including a sex trafficking statute. And I think Dawn is right, it still needs to be tested, but there's no reason why pornography could not be, if we find the right case, could not be a part of the trafficking victims of this federal law. It created a new office to monitor and combat trafficking in persons. It mandated an annual report on trafficking in persons where we had to look at every single country in the world and rate them on their progress on prevention, protection, and prosecution. And it created a president's task force on trafficking in persons, which is important because it brought the political will. It started at the top level. And as we all know, for those of us who were working with Attorney General Meese, or even before that on the Commission on Obscenity and Pornography, if you have that top-level buy-in from the president that streams down, you can make much more progress than if you're starting mid-level. So we do need to continue to work on that. So that brings you, basically, then the last 15 or 17 years worth of work, which you all have been involved in, so I don't need to update you on that. But it gives you a little bit of an idea of how long this battle has been going on. And it took us 70 years to get here. It's going to take us, I don't want to say 70 years to get out, but we have to have the patience and the fortitude and the determination and the courage to continue until the work is done.